Good evening, brothers and sisters, and everybody who's online. We have had a pretty bad year, really. 2022, I think none of us are going to be sad to say goodbye to it. And I think a lot of people around the world are really hoping for a better year in 2023. But I don't think many people today have a lot of hope that next year will be, this year that we're in now, as of today, will be any better than the last year. In fact, I think there's a lot of reasons people are looking at it very pessimistic viewpoints, with a lot of worry for their own lives, for what's happening on the earth in a greater sense. They're having a lot less faith than they have in the past. And so there's not a lot of hope for people in the world today. We're going to look at this in a little bit of detail, and then I want to share with you some of the verses from the Bible that give me hope for the future. Regardless of all the sad and awful things that are happening in the world, regardless of the diseases and wars and everything else, there's a wonderful hope that God's put in his book, the Bible, that everybody can have access to if only they would just read the book and do a little bit of the things there, do what God tells them to do, and there's wonderful hope for the new year. So it was kind of funny. Someone pointed this out to me the last time I gave this talk, that it looks like the Ukrainian fellow there who's launching a rocket, it looks like he's exploding the universe. But this is supposed to be an image of a nuclear bomb going off, a fellow shooting a rocket in Ukraine. And then over here on the right is a photograph or a painting someone imagined of what it might look like for angels to be coming in the kingdom, and for the kingdom of God to be arising on the earth, coming out of heaven. So it's not the universe exploding. All right, so I'm going to look at some statistics for a few minutes. And this first statistic is quite a depressing one, really. It goes back to just after World War II, and it's looking at deaths in state-based conflicts by world region. And so you can see there how there was a lot of deaths in wars, famines. This is not looking at disease or famine. This is just looking at violent death caused by wars and conflicts in the last, 70 odd years, different places. You can see the Middle East has had a lot. There was some pretty bad things in Asia and Oceania in the 80s and leading up till today. It's quite bad, though. You think about, there just always seems to be war. We might look at this war in Ukraine today and the civil unrest in Iran and all of the problems in different parts of the world and think, wow, this is a uniquely bad time. But it's not really. There's been war since everybody started recording war. And in fact, today is maybe a bit of a lull, a lower area in the wars and deaths by war. This is another interesting one. You can see a look at since 1400 conflict deaths. Again, another statistic here. You can see how the great disasters of the early part of the 1900s with World War I and World War II, and just how much conflict deaths there were. This isn't counting civilian deaths at all, it's just soldiers. It's pretty bad. But you can see again today, it's quite low. This is an interesting statistic that shows to the last 70 years or so, how this is looking at conflicts where the government is attacking their own people. So it's very similar to what's happening in Iran today, we might think of, where you have the population rising up against the government. They're not happy with something, they want something changed, and the government's coming back and attacking the people. And you can see how this is actually increasing since World War II till today. There's over 50 different types of these internal conflicts all around the world, and it's pretty bad. Here's another one, a map of ongoing conflicts today. So we know about the one in Ukraine, probably in Iran the most, but there is awful conflicts going on all around the world. Not so much in the English-speaking part of the world. I think, luckily, and thanks to God, that we live in such a peaceful country like the UK and Canada, where I was from. It's a very, really nice place to live if you're going to be outside of conflicts. There's nothing really happening in those countries today. But the rest of the world, it's pretty dark out there. This is another look at different ideas about the Global Peace Index. And I think it's looking at what is the most peaceful countries. I find they're coloring a little funny on this one, but the most peaceful countries are colored black, and it goes to less peaceful. And this is talking about internal peace within the country. So violent crime and things like this, murders, gun crime, things like that. And you can see how most of Europe and Canada, a lot of the English speaking part of the world, again, is quite nice. America has a lot of problems, obviously, with this type of issues, but the rest of the world is awful. It's just so not peaceful. There's so much problems going on in the world. And this is a map from a few days ago of Ukraine, of the war map. And we all know what's happening down in that area of the world. But it's just, we see this all the time. Some of the things, though, that have happened in Ukraine, we haven't seen since World War II. And so it draws a lot of our attention. What's going to happen this year? How far is Vladimir Putin going to push in his war? How far is he going to go to try to take what he wants, which is all of Ukraine and other parts of other nations as well? How far will he go? Why is he doing this? We just don't know the answers to this yet, but we observe it, and it's really shocking and quite scary for a lot of people, especially the ones living over, like our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and the nations around there in Eastern Europe. See if this works. Okay, this is a little video clip. I think the sound will work, but we'll give it a shot and see. Okay, hold on a second. Let me turn up the sound. This was a reporter on 60 Minutes, and he asked President Biden a little while ago, what would happen if Vladimir Putin decides to use a small tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, or a weapon of mass destruction to advance his goals? And this was the response from Putin, or from Biden, from President Biden.
As Ukraine succeeds on the battlefield, Vladimir Putin is becoming embarrassed and pushed into a corner. And I wonder, Mr. President, what you would say to him if he is considering using chemical or tactical nuclear weapons.
Don't. It would change the face of war, unlike anything since World War II.
And the consequences of that would be what? What would the U.S. response be?
I think I would tell you if I knew exactly what it would be. Of course, I'm not going to tell you. It'll be consequential. They'll become more of a pariah in the world than they ever have been. And depending on the extent of what they do will determine what response would occur.
So a lot of people are watching this very carefully. What is Russia going to do? Are they going to use weapons of mass destruction? And if they do, what will the West do? How will they respond? And a lot of people, you talk to people at work about this in the neighborhood, and people are very worried about this. They don't really see a lot of hope. What will we do how will we respond if these things happen? There's the protests going on, such as in Iran, and the terrible things that our brothers and sisters here in the UK are experiencing via social media with friends and family back home. And we've had many of the brethren in the Down End meeting. They come to Sunday, they don't look happy at all, do they? They look really, really stressed, really upset. And if you take some time and chat with them to see, how are you doing? You don't look happy at all. They'll tell you exactly what's going on. And one brother told me that when he wakes up every morning, he spends about an hour on social media trying to track down friends and family, and just trying to see, are they still alive? They've survived the night. And some people have sisters and mothers and other family members who are in areas that have been cut off completely from the internet. No one knows if they're dead or alive, what's going on. And it's a very worrisome time for our brothers and sisters from Iran who have joined us in the UK. There was a poll done recently looking at the UK specifically. It was about a month ago, and they asked people in the UK, what's the most important issues facing the country? And you can see there now that how much people since the summertime are worried about money. They're worried about, how am I going to heat my house this winter? How am I going to pay for electricity? How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to pay for the automobile, the cars? There's just so much to worry about with the state of the economy around the world since the war started in Ukraine. People are really upset and worried about this around the world. This is just a map showing how much things have gone crazy. It's just gone through the roof. How are we going to pay for this? I haven't got a raise. People are thinking that my weekly paycheck. How am I going to afford this? And it's causing people to worry so much about their finances. I know that I've heard stories of parents who will go around the house, and when they find a thermostat, they'll get the old super glue out and glue it to 14 so no one can touch it. No one's going to raise temperature. There's people that we know of strikes going on and turmoil in the workforce all across the country. This was just a chart put out by the BBC for some of the places that are not happy with the way work is right now. And they're worried about, how am I going to survive on the current money I'm on? There's just a lot of worry and no hope for the future in the world today. This is post-COVID as well. There's a lot of symptoms of anxiety and depression across all age groups, but especially in the age groups which you think really should have the most hope and the most enthusiasm for the future. Younger folk who have all their lives ahead of them, and they've been through university and they're ready to go start up a business, to change things in the world, work at a company perhaps, start making money and enjoying life, start a family maybe. And they're the ones in that younger age group of 25 to 34 who are the most anxious and depressed across the whole world because they don't see a future. They can't get a good job. What they did in university seems to be meaningless for a lot of people. There's no money involved. Why should I work, they think. And there's this whole movement right now where they are very worried about the future. They see absolutely no hope for themselves. They could never see themselves, for example, buying a house, even buying a car. Things that when I was young, that was the first things you looked at. You got to get your apartment, you have to have your car, you had to get out of mom and dad's house. And today people just think that's never going to happen for me. It's just a real worry out there. There's another statistic here. This is across different people in different jobs. I think this is across the NHS, but or no, is this in school? Yeah, school. And teachers have noticed a massive increase this year in school pupils for all kinds of mental health issues to do with the lack of hope, the lack of seeing what's going to happen in the future and having faith that anything's going to be good. It's very disturbing. We know that during the lockdown, all kinds of domestic problems, violence against husbands against wives and vice versa, parents against children, it's gone up significantly in England and Wales. Look at violent crime going up across the last 20 years and how much things are just going up as people seemingly have no hope and turn to crime and violence to find a way in life. This statistic came out just recently, looking at these days, how many British people are religious? And you think about this, this kind of makes sense. The fact that people have no hope and are so depressed today is because they have no hope. There's nothing for them. They have no religion at all. They don't believe in anything outside of themselves and their own lives. It's never been like this before, I think, in the UK, where more people had no religion at all than had a religion of some type. And it's even more so for people under the age of 30. 70% of young people under the age of 30 have absolutely no religion or no interest in anything other than the here and now of their lives. And that's the same group who are most affected, worrying about the future. And so the question comes up is, will there ever be peace? Is there ever going to be a hope for the world? And of course, we know the answer is yes, there will be. There will be hope. There will be peace. There will be peace on this earth. The wars that we see today are not going to last forever. And I just want to look for a few minutes at some symbols we might see in the Bible for some of the prophecies that talk about the kingdom coming and this great era of peace and hope for everybody. Daniel chapter 2, there's a great image used in Daniel chapter 2. The nations are discussed in poetic language in many songs and poems and parables in the Bible. And one of the things they're talked about is as an image in Daniel chapter 2. I think many of us might remember this great statue that was seen in the dream by Nebuchadnezzar, different body parts of different materials, and each one of those symbolized the mightiest empires of the world. But you remember there at the end of Daniel chapter 2 and the very verses 34 and 35, what happened to these self-consumed nations of men? Well, there was a little rock there, wasn't there? That little rock that was cut out without hands. And Daniel says in verse 34, thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands. It smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. And then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold broken to pieces together. It became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. So there was no place found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And the next page over, verse 44. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. The kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, that it break in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation sure thereof. So this is the prophecy, and this is basically, I think, a really good summary of our hope. Kingdom's coming. All these things we see today should not make us have no hope. It's something we need to observe and to think about perhaps, and maybe to plan a little bit, but it's not something that should take our hope away, that should make us depressed and anxious, because these things in the world are not really to do with us in a lot of ways. We may be related to them through family members and things like that, but we have to observe these things and realize that this is all supposed to happen, unfortunately, because of man's sin. There's a cool picture I found of someone's painting of this. Another interesting symbol for the nations of man, and again, looking at them as they think they're so powerful, it's from the book of Revelation. So if you look at Revelation chapter 17, there's this symbol for the nations, which is the sea. So the great oceans of the world would be this, the water. Revelation chapter 17, for example, verse 15, one of the symbols it says there, he saith to me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes of nations and tongues. So when we're reading through Revelation and some of the other prophecies, we're going to see in this symbolic vision, water, the sea, the oceans, and it's either crashing like amazing, powerful waves, or it's very still like glass. And this is what we're going to be told of the state of today, where the nations are fighting and there's problems. And sometimes, like in the great world wars, there's even more problems than today. But sometimes it's always still as well. So when the sea is raging, what is that talking about in prophecy? We'll just look at Luke chapter 21, for example, and it talks about the Lord discusses what this symbol means there. Luke chapter 21, verse 25. There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. So that's what it's like today, with nations going to war against other nations and all these violent problems in the world. The Lord is saying that it's like the waves and the sea roaring. That's a symbol that we might see today. I saw this cool picture as well from, I think, might have been from that movie, The Perfect Storm, but You ever been down in Cornwall and there's a big storm that's come across the Atlantic? I've seen some images at Porthlevin with these massive waves just crashing over the seawall and going right over the houses on the seawall line there. And you think about how, what an amazing image or a symbol used for the nations going to war against each other when they're just all crashing together and violently. And you might think if you're a little boat, just think of the boat as a little person in the world who doesn't really know anything about the Bible, has no hope, and they just feel like they're tossed to and fro, that nobody cares about them, that there's no way that they're just going to sink in this crashing water. But the Bible also says that sometimes, and especially in the kingdom, the sea will be at peace. We'll just flip over to Psalm 89. This is an example of one of the Bible symbols of the world at peace. 89 verse 9, and it reads, "Thou rulest the raging of the seas. When the waves thereof arise, thou stillest them." And this means, of course, that God is the one in control. So that, yes, the waves are roaring today and nations are attacking other nations and there's wars in the world, but that ultimately, in the end, God could stop this, and he will stop this at some future time in the kingdom. Similar idea in verse 65, chapter 65, verse 7 of Psalms, which stilleth the noise of the sea, the noise of the waves, the tumult of the people. It's this idea that God uses throughout the Bible to talk about how the waves crashing are just like people fighting. And it's a powerful image there. Look at this one, the Psalm 107, verse 25 and 29. God commandeth and raiseth the stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They mount up to the heavens, they go down to the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. They reel to and fro and stagger like drunken men, and are at their wits' end. Then they cry out of the Lord of their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distress. He maketh the storm a calm, so that the waves thereof are still. This is speaking of the little boats that go out, the fishermen, when they get in trouble in a storm, and how God sometimes can make all the waters go at peace so that the little fishing boats can go home. And this is, again, this image of the nations of the world finally coming to peace. It's all under God's control. You ever seen a beautiful sea on a very still day where it's like glass? It's such a peaceful image of the kingdom, of our hope, of maybe this year, will Jesus return perhaps? And this is what the world's nations will be like at that time, with God in control and God in command. So the thing that we know, and it's a unfortunate thing in a way, because the nations of men will never ever be able to come to peace. Never we're going to have a hope. They're not going to be able to solve all the problems of the world. In fact, it's just going to get worse. Environmental problems, they're never going to get better with men at the helm. The wars of the world will never go away completely with men controlling things. But the Bible teaches that a lot of the bad things today that happen, like pestilence and disease and all these other problems, they're going to continue. It might get worse, but at some point in time, the Lord Jesus Christ will return. And upon his return to the earth and the establishment of that everlasting kingdom, then peace will truly arrive on earth. Look back at that passage we had in Isaiah. This is a wonderful, peaceful passage looking at the kingdom of what it would be like. And you can imagine in your mind's eye of that hope that we have. Imagine yourself just there in Jerusalem. It says, I can just read these again. It will come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the tops of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways. He will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Now, mankind has recognized that this is, well, part of this anyway, is where we want to be, right? We want to have a world where nobody is fighting wars, there's no violence. That's where mankind wants to be. But man does not know how to get there without God. You've probably seen this before, I'm sure, outside of the United Nations building in New York City. They've just selected a little bit there. They've taken God out of the passage. But all they have here is the ultimate goal of the United Nations is to discuss problems rather than go to war. But when you look back at the history since it started, it hasn't really solved this problem. We haven't had a situation where there's ever been peace since the United Nations was conceived of, even started. And they never will until Jesus returns to the world. There's also a famous statue there outside of the United Nations building where the man is smashing his big sword into a farm implement. But it's this idea that we can do it. Men and women of the world can get together. We can solve our own problems. We don't need God, but they do. And there's no hope until they decide to learn from that. So let's think about our own lives today. Outside of these problems, these huge problems that we can do really nothing about, our faith, it can give us a measure of peace today. The things that we worry about, the money problems, the disease problems, worried about our family around the world. We can send these worries up to God in prayer, and he'll give us peace today. There's many passages of the Bible that tell us to do this. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Cast your care upon him, for he careth for you. God cares for every one of us. Whatever we're worried about today, just send it to God in prayer, and he will take care of you. You don't have to worry about it. We don't have to stress and be anxious about these things. God will take care of us. The Lord himself promises this in Matthew 11, verse 28. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You know, sometimes when you're worried about something that you're trying to get to sleep at night, you can't turn your brain off, and it's something in the daytime you probably wouldn't even really worry about. That's a great time to turn over your mind in prayer, to just talk to God, to give it up to God in prayer. And you'll find pretty quickly that you're able to get some rest. Psalm 4, verse 8, again, another promise here from God. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. We have a hope, brothers and sisters, a wonderful hope. It's going to be in the future when the kingdom comes, but even still today, we can have peace, we can have hope in our lives, regardless of what's happening in the world around us. I just want to leave us with this one passage from John. The Lord says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. And this, I think, is a really amazing verse to meditate upon if we're anxious about anything. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Whatever we've done, we made a mistake perhaps, and now we're dealing with the consequences. It doesn't matter what it is. Whatever we're worried about, this is something we can think about this year. It may be a difficult year for many people in the world, but it doesn't have to end with us giving up the peace in our lives in Christ.